Um, okay. I have a procedural question for someone.
Sure.
As Ian said earlier, I have no objections to reading the Zoom script. Ordinarily, I'm doing this for my board, where I'm identifying the members of my board that are on. Should I proceed in that manner? Because the Concom would need to open their own meeting. I'm not sure they need to read the same remote script or anything like that. But so when I move forward, which I will do in a moment, I will be identifying the members of my board and taking roll call for my board. Does that
Yeah,
sound
and
good
then-
for everyone? Okay, Ollie's give me the thumbs up. That's the best news I've ever seen. Okay, everybody, welcome to this joint meeting. Here are some guidelines for the Zoom meetings. We're using Zoom, which allows for public to participate in the meeting as an attendee. The chair can request that members of the public provide their names for purposes of keeping accurate minutes of the meeting. Attendees must register to participate. The registration link is unique to this meeting. The registration link can be found in the description of the.
Taking care to identify yourself.
I'm about to, Stephen.
Great.
I'm going to do a roll call that would include myself.
So,
Well, here we go. For the record, this is Ray,
Um,
Chairman of the Historic
look for a
District
motion
Commission.
to approve the agenda. So moved, sir. Second. Moved by Barry, second by Nat. Barry. Aye. Nat. Aye. Joe. Aye.
Whoever's the host might just mute Stephen.
Sounds like you might be in a dual meeting.
I'm as baffled
I'm as baffled as Ray as to
I
how.
believe the planning board, so
In the middle.
apologies.
I'm impressed that he's got two
thanks.
meetings going at
Thanks,
once.
Ian. I was thinking something escaped me. Okay, so back to our Zoom meeting. Attendees will join in listening mode. They can click the raise hand button if they wish to speak. The chair will call on those who have raised their hands in the order that they were raised, and all questions, of course, should be directed through the chair. As a preliminary matter, my name is Ray Pohl. I'm the chairman of the Nantucket Historic District Commission. Permit me to confirm that all the members and persons on my board are present and can hear me. Members, these are the names that I was able to get off of viewing roll. I have members, when I call your names, please respond in the affirmative. I have Diane Coombs.
Aye.
Thank you, Diane. I have Joe Paul.
Aye.
Very good. I have Carrie Thornwell.
Aye.
Very good. And I have Stephen Welch. And we know that Stephen is muted at the moment, I
Yes.
believe.
And Val Oliver's here. Aye.
Oh, and Val Oliver is with us. And again, my name is Ray Pohl for the record.
Ray, it's Connie Patton. I'm here
Oh,
too.
Connie, you too. Good Lord. Okay.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Connie. Okay, the other boards will identify their members.
I'm an aye.
Okay, so.
On the NR, we're gonna pull out David Beaumont at 35.
Let's consider that an aye from Stephen as being
Okay.
present for the HDC.
So,
Okay,
so I'm joining on behalf of the Conservation Commission. I'm the chairman. Ian Golding. I'm not going to get involved in the Zoom chatter, which Ray has already given. So,
Hey, Ian.
members?
Ian,
yeah.
point of
Who-
clarification.
not
I've got a
muted?
little bit more left to go.
Okay,
It's boilerplate, but I'll just run through it.
yeah,
This open meeting is conducted pursuant to chapters 2 of the Acts of 2023. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will not feature public comment. This meeting is convening by video conference on the Zoom app as posted on the town's website. Please note that everything in this meeting is being recorded and that all attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other people may be able to see and hear you, and to take care not to screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. I think that should be it for now. Ian, it's over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. Sorry to have jumped the gun there.
No problem.
Permit me to identify my fellow Conservation Commission members. My name is Ian Golding. I'm the chair. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Mark Beal.
Here.
Kim Brain.
Here.
Seth Engelborg. Here. And I don't see at this juncture either Mike Miserelli, Joe Plandowski, or Linda Williams, both of whom I know that Joe and Linda are trying to get in, so we'll identify them later. And with that, I hand over to whoever is taking this meeting.
All right. I'd like to thank you all for coming here. Holly, Vince, and myself, I've been working with Weston and Sampson on some preliminary design work for Children's Beach and Jetty's concession areas. And we wanted to get the two groups together today, kind of in a setting where we can show you what we've been working on and get some high-level feedback from you. This meeting will by no means serve as in place for an official meeting with each board, but we wanted to make sure that we're heading in the right direction. We thought it'd be a good idea to get some feedback. So with that, I'll turn over to Matt and James from Weston and Sampson, and they'll lead us through everything we've been working on.
Thank you, Charlie. My name is Matt Soul. I'm a senior project manager with Weston and Sampson. I'm a registered landscape architect. I'll be running through the presentation and talking about the site design. And I also have with me James Barron from Weston and Sampson. We'll be talking through the architecture.
Thank you, Matt.
Share my screen here. Can everybody see the screen share?
Yes.
Thank you. So we've been working with the client group to study Jetty's Beach and Children's Beach to look at the concessions buildings for and assess this sort of resilience, dangers and from sea level rise and how we could mitigate those. We also looked at Surfside as part of the same contract, but Surfside is far enough away from the waterfront that it is not in immediate danger. So for the moment, we're focusing on Jetties and Children's. We have gone through several rounds, just some quick background, and then we'll go through Children's and Jetties in that order. We've gone through several back and forths in terms of design with the client group, and we've gotten to a point where we're looking for feedback from both of these bodies. So I appreciate your time today. We've also conducted an online survey of the public to understand the public use of Jetties, Children's, and Surfside, and also what people's appetite for change on various sites. And so we've also taken that into account. And then we've also looked at the coastal resilience plan, obviously, and how that fits in with these sites. So starting with Children's Beach. And also, I just want to say, if something isn't clear, please jump in and ask for clarification at any time. So overall, for the coastal resilience plan context, I'm going to zoom into this corner here. So Children's Beach fits within the downtown strategy, and we'll look at that in greater detail. We'll look at a zoomed in plan again. So this isn't the last time you'll see this drawing. And then jetties sits outside the near-term strategies. And again, we'll look at that in context of the near term and then the long-term, conceptual long-term strategies, knowing that these were not actual recommendations of the plan, but were purely concepts that were floated as ideas. So starting with Children's Beach. So we looked at 3 options. We looked at just raising the building in place without any site manipulation. We looked at raising grade 1.5 feet and setting building 3.7 feet above grade. Currently, the building sits 1.3 feet above grade. So that's its current relationship to grade. So obviously 3.7 would be a big departure from that, and we can look, we'll look at the elevations and what that means in terms of access and the building facades. And then we looked at terracing the site up to 8.9, and then allowing the building to maintain its current relationship to grade. And then both 2A and 2B, which we pushed further than option 1. Early on, it was determined that option 1 was the least desirable of the options. And then so this, we'll look at the site and how what we mean by site berm and how that fits into the coastal resilience plan. And a quick word about our design flood elevations and how we arrived at our numbers. So we are using the MCFRM 2050 1% or 100-year storm with a still water elevation. We're not using, we have in here that what the 2050 100-year storm would be for with wave action, which raises it, you know, almost 4 feet. And so we landed on the 2050 still water elevation as a achievable goal that did not raise the FFE beyond what is sort of practicable, honestly. And we did go back and forth on this, you know, internally with the design, with the client group. So, so 10.2 is our design flood elevation for this site. So to zoom into the coastal resilience plan, the Children's Beach site is proposed to be protected by a berm with essentially what in the plan it calls it a beach berm. So we drew out in a bit more just sort of conceptual detail what that looks like, you know, at the site. So the proposed raised bulkhead comes through here. There's the concept of the raised beach berm comes through the site, and then it has to meet the raised road. And the target elevations for these elements is 7.23. We've rounded that up to 7.25. Just higher is always better. So, oh, excuse me. So in the 2 options that are 2A and 2B, we're aiming for a 7.25 elevation across the site that would be in agreement with the coastal resilience plan. And then we'll also talk about the interface between the raised road and the site and how that could be accomplished. So this is the building as it stands, as it exists today with the accessibility ramps. James, do you want to say anything about the building?
So the current state of it, but it's a vernacular architecture, a colonial state. It has 2 accessible ramps, as Matt had suggested. Bringing up that Holly's point, Vince and Charlie's point is, this building is managed by a yearly contract or bi-yearly contract with a concession system. And it has elements that if we were to relocate it or lift it up, we'd have to take everything into play. The two existing restrooms, public restrooms in the rear of the building are not accessible per se. One is locked up, the other one is for storage. So one of the solutions of raising the structure is to come up with external restrooms for future use for the building and for the site. And that go ahead, Matt, if you want to bring into the, the next slide.
Mhm. Yeah.
So go ahead, Matt.
Oh, no, I think, James, if you want to tackle this one, because really it's really just raising the building without any sort of site improvements.
Exactly. So to raise the building up, the thing it is, we're building a structure, raising the structure up and building a Chinese wall around it to make the building more accessible. Well, it has it takes away from the curb appeal of the building and the site, because now you have a continuous ramps and a platform in the rear of the building for accessible use. Secondly, it doesn't feed on itself as being inviting to others, because you just have stairs and ramp. The visual impact is taken away because of all this ramp and extension, but for the ramp and extension to exist, it has to the building has to be raised up. So this option was, talked about, but it's not something that we as Weston Sampson and its parties agree this is the best solution. And then like I mentioned earlier, we talked about basically having an external restroom facility, which would be the rear of the building where right now the exterior freezer or coolers are located. And it really doesn't solve, it solves the accessible, but it doesn't solve, the vernacular design. It's at the same time, it's encroaching on, individuals using it. So basically, as Matt and I, we went back to the drawing boards, came up with another option. So.
And in terms of the sort of historical character of the building, James, is it fair to say that we're sort of hiding the building behind all these ramps?
Correct. Thank you, Matt.
Yeah, no problem. And yes, thank you for mentioning the outbuildings. I should have noted that there's currently a freezer on site that's used by the concessionaire. There's a mobile bathroom trailer, and there's a bandstand that's well used and well loved, some sheds for storage and for information center, and then some utilities on the side here, as well as the important pump station that's located in the corner of the site. And so in this version, we looked at the building alone. And this is, again, just as we were saying, the amount of stairs and ramps needed in this version was really deemed not, that we found there were other options that were better and sort of fit the historical character better. Is that fair to say, James?
Yes, yeah. I mean, the ramp and itself is basically based on the Resilience Nantucket Flooding Adaptation and Building Elevation Design Guidelines. But if you really take it one step further, as being an architect, you can come up with a more pleasing to the eye and still have the character of the building to exist on the site instead of bearing up with accessible ramps. So it really didn't, it solved one problem, but caused 3 other problems to exist.
So the next version we looked at was raising grade 1.5 feet, and then setting the building at 10.2 for a finished floor elevation. So the building is still 3.7 feet above grade, which is obviously higher than it is now, which changes the character somewhat. And James, I'm gonna, so I'm going to jump to the plan first, and then we'll go to the drawing, the plans and elevations of the building. So by raising grade at the building, it allows us to slowly ramp up to a berm that would be set at the sort of goal of the coastal resilience plan. That would be 7.25 across the site. As part of this, you would propose to raise the playground. The berm would run in front of the playground. This green area in front of that could potentially all be dune restoration. Again, to help mitigate storm surge. And then there would be boardwalk access through the dune restoration to access the beach. So and that the existing pump station vault would be raised to be over a foot above, a foot clear of the berm. And then at the building, the access would be on the side, the ramp access would be along the side to keep the front clear of the ramp. And we can zoom into that on the next slide, but essentially the seating area that's currently on grade would be lifted up and put up on a porch, essentially. So the seating area would sort of, for patrons, would still exist with shrub plantings around the building. And then at the end of the berm, we would propose a wall. And the reason for the new wall would be in the future, as part of the coastal resilience plan, this road is proposed to be raised to 7.223 or 7.25. And so this wall would be built to 8.75, which is 18 inches above the future new road. So that allows the new road to be raised, the road to be raised in the future. Apologies, it's not a new road. And then also for the boat ramp to be retrofitted all against this wall, which would allow the site to remain undisturbed through that work. So it's a pretty interesting site in terms of trying to figure out, this is where the rubber of the coastal resilience plan, meets the road, and how this actually gets executed. And then in terms of the building and the building character, I'll let James speak to that in terms of how we address that.
So on the building itself, in this design, we basically took the accessible ramp, and put it at the back of the site, back of the building, closer to what used to be, or is the boat storage area. Having the access to the front or the concession area with the main stairs and the ramp to the left, wraps around, then comes to, as I would call, the new porch. The porch would be facing the area, as Matt had mentioned, the bandstand area. Then we now have a proposed exterior accessible restrooms, 2 unisex bathrooms and a mechanical room. That structure would be off to the backside, closer to the tennis courts. So now by doing a design like this, you basically have individuals approach the building, used by access of ramp or by stairs, use the building as circumvent as basically a concession area, a true concession area, and then using the new proposed bathrooms or restrooms to the backside of the building. Using, once again, the resilience, Nantucket Resilience Building Elevation Guidelines and Department of Interior standards, we would not change the character. The only character of a changing would, of course, be lifting up the building and have the wraparound, I call porch, and concession area for eating, and at the same time use the character of the site to work with the blending of the facade. Once again, it's not something I have on my deck together and enjoyment, but we're solving the three problems that have arisen for this site. There's pluses and minuses. A plus is that basically everyone's central entrance and it's all the entrances to the deck work with what originally is there. Another plus is that, you know, the building is still standing, but it doesn't have all these ramps. There's one ramp, and the ramp is tucked behind the building. Another is the addition for the restrooms, and the addition of the restrooms follows the same lines for the both the shape of the building and the gable end of the existing Children's Beach concession building. So it's, you know, it's pleasant to look at. It has some, you know, it's still in the early form schematics, but there's, you know, there's a lot we can add to it and subtract to it. So go ahead, Matt.
Thank you, James. And then the last option we looked at is terracing the site up to 8.9, which keeps the building at its present relationship to grade, which is 1.3 feet. We went through a real push and pull here of, you know, getting up to 10.2 is a significant elevation change. And so we're trying to, you know, do you know, obviously if you pull the building up too high without pulling up grade, it just kind of ruins the building character. And so we've been trying to find that sweet spot between, you know, raising grade and sort of raising the building. So I think we prefer this option, and we can talk through why. So it has a ramp on the face that ramps you up slowly to the access point, which we would maintain the ramp that's there today. And we can jump to the plan to see that a little bit better. But and then also there would be plantings around the building to mitigate the, you know, that grade change. We can look at the grading there. So we're still raising grade a little over a foot to 6.25 from its current elevation of 5 to lessen the amount of ramping you need to do. And then you ramp up to one elevation, which is your 7.25. So that's our protection berm elevation. So that would be the elevation of the playground. Yeah, and then your coplanar all the way across. I apologize. It says 7.25 here. It should say 7.25 here. I apologize. That's an error. So you're at this one continuous elevation across the site, and then there's another ramp. So you can ramp up just to get to the playground. It also ramps up outside the walls to a more roundabout way to the playground. Then there's a direct switchback that gets you up onto the picnic terrace at 8.9, and then you have the accessible ramp almost as it is today that gets you to the building FFE. Again, and then it's the same site treatment in terms of the north edge of the site with the future raised road. And again, a dune restoration in front of this, along this new raised edge, and a boardwalk through to the beach. And then we were careful to keep the walls. The walls are perpendicular to the coastline. There's no wall that's parallel to the coastline. So walls that are parallel to the coastline exacerbate wave reflection and scour. So if this is overtopped, the waves are really just going past the walls. They're not hitting we're not introducing a vertical surface. And then we're coming back down to existing grade in the back corner, and just enough to still get water out from that back corner at elevation 5.75 back there. And I'll let James speak to the James. In this version, we are not addressing the unanchored sheds that are on site. We would propose a raised pad for the utility cabinets that are on site. Ray, I see you have your hand up.
So I have a load of comments and questions. Is it appropriate to start into it at this point, or would you guys like to continue?
If we could just wrap up this description of this version of the building, and then we'll stop and we can discuss the versions as a whole for children's before moving on to jetties. Does that sound good?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
And so then we'll, and so the bandstand would be retrofitted to have breakaway back walls, but we're not proposing to raise the bandstand at this point. And then James, I'll let you speak to the building changes. Thank you.
Yeah, so the 2B Terrace site berm, basically we're not really taking a lot of what is existing for the Children's Beach concession area. We're by doing the bare minimum, but just now it's a grade change instead of a platform and terrace change. It doesn't put a lot of impact on the building per se. And it's, visually, it doesn't take it away from the site itself. Once again, on the rear of the building, we do show accessible bathrooms that are open year round, and vernacular plays off the building itself. I think that's the important thing is, keeping the consistency of the design and for the addition and for the original building, and visually it works with the site to, developing it this way instead of having these additional ramps that brings the building up, so set in place, which really all three options talk about set in place. I think this is we embraced the comments from the early level of the community. And I think Matt and I have come up with a pretty good solution, but we're open to suggestions, of course, so.
Okay.
Yeah, so I would open it up to comments and questions at this point. Thank you.
So I'm going to just jump right in. I think I don't need to poll my board to know that all of the members of my board would be in favor of doing as little to the existing stand as possible in terms of visual impediments, or somebody said a Chinese wall. Wrapping this whole thing with this massive amount of ramping given the scale of this building, really overwhelms and compromises it fairly drastically. So now, having said that, as a practicing architect down here, I'm aware that the Concom generally does not approve fill in a zone like this. All of Brant Point, I believe, the Concom is not. But I would love to hear from Ian and his group on this. They may surprise me, but I think that ultimately they don't like people importing fill, raising grade down in that area. So this is sort of the crux of the issue is, if there's no fill, or the less fill there is, the more impactful, visually impactful the ramp and all that sort of thing is going to be. I'm going to introduce a few concepts. Like, as an architect, I know that at least for residential work, anything that is less than 30 inches above grade does not have to have the vertical, the balusters and that sort of thing that a normal staircase would have. Because so in other words, you could have sort of an open rail on top and an open rail like midway down, and have it be more cottagey in feel and certainly less heavy feeling than it does in any of these renderings that you've done. The other thing is Holly has been involved in this, and so my first question, if I were sitting on the HCC reviewing this, would be, what is the age of this building? Holly, is that something that you can answer?
It's a contributing structure, 1960.
Okay,
Nin-
so let's go
1950,
down this
1960.
road for a moment, and maybe that road has already been gone down. But if it's a contributing structure, the HDC is empowered to issue it we can issue essentially a letter to the applicant, to you folks, that basically says what you have here is a contributing structure, and that it is exempt by the virtue of the fact that it is contributing. It is exempt from having to meet all of the flood codes. So I don't know whether that applies to this commercial building, but I would say, and we can certainly get more granular on this with different members of my board, but I would say, the proposal that we're looking at really stresses a very small, light, cottagey building beyond what I think it should be doing. So those are my initial comments.
Great, thank you.
So, Ray,
Yes.
as a protocol, would you like to ask other members of the HCC to speak on the issue before I ask members of Concom to speak on it?
Sure, Ian, that would be fine. I don't want to monopolize the time. We do have a number of members. Val, by the way, has left us. But so Joe, Diane, Carrie, Stephen, Connie, your thoughts on what has been presented so far?
I'll go.
Thanks, Diane.
My thought is with you is keeping it as much as it is, as can be, to existing. The second thing, which is a question that I don't know the answer to, and I've tried to find out looking up things on internet, is can this building have underpinnings that are flood acceptable without disturbing the building? So you could dig it into or put pilings down enough to hold it. And if it got flooded, it would be built the first floor in such a way that it comes to be very close to being waterproof. I know that they do that in some buildings that can't be moved. And it seems something that would be good for us to understand with the question of that's coming up with all sorts of buildings. And I think that the simpler it can be, the simpler and openest that it can be kept down there, I think is important. It always has been an open area. People sit on the bandstand, on the grass, whatever, to listen. And I think it's important to keep it that way as much as we can. Thank you.
Diane, thank you. Stephen, I see your hand raised. You may be muted, Stephen.
Thanks, Mr. Chair.
There you go.
Sorry, I got a couple things going on.
Yeah, so we see. Stephen,
That
you there?
That-
Oh, boy, we may be having technical difficulties.
sorry, Mr. Chair, I'm back.
There you are. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so I guess I'll just be quick. Where I'm at with this is, I don't want to get into architectural comments. I believe this is going to require butter notifications, so I don't want to get into any of that discussion other than to say, I agree with the chair's comments. I agree with Diane's comments. I am concerned about the ADA being around the back. I'd like to get an understanding of how this fits into the town's vision, the Concom's vision, and Coastal Resiliency's group vision with respect to how this particular approach, which is, I guess along the lines of hardening in the sense of, or not retreating, but raising, how does this fit into the bigger picture? And under the common ground approach, no pun intended, sitting here with Concom, I'd like to get some understanding of what they think about raising the grade, because my understanding was that was kind of a no-no, and we've always steered away from that. It'd be a very important tool. I don't think to be doing in this instance and in others around Brant Point and other areas, I don't think it'd be wise to be doing it piecemeal. So I'd like to understand their thoughts, one, on the strategy, and two, on a comprehensive approach. Perhaps an area plan would be appropriate. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks so much, Stephen. Okay, Joe, Carrie, Connie.
I don't have a hand raising thing, or I can't find it.
Well, you don't need it. I'm recognizing you.
Thank you. I, along the lines of what you said, Ray, I would most want to preserve the building as visually impactful as it is today. I am not against raising the grade, but knowing that Concom might be, I think we really need to pay attention to what they have to say. But if they would consider it in this case, I feel like we should sort of split the difference and maybe ramp some grade and then ramp some building. Already there is a ramp that wraps from the main entry around the back, I believe. And I just wonder if we can still ramp from the main entry and then around the back, and maybe in a way that you could get up half the distance, in terms of splitting the difference between grade and building being raised. But again, what you had said, which I think is really important, is maybe crossbucks or something, so you don't have that more than 30-inch drop, so you can have light visibility through any new decking and railing and all that stuff. And I also have more questions about raising of the grade of the park and how to get down to the beach and the dune that's there and the wall that's already there and all that. So I would have more questions about the overall site. So that's all I've got now. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much. Joe, Connie.
I'll say one thing. Hi, I think this is in the lines with everybody else.
For the record. Sorry, go, Joe.
Sure. I think it's pretty clear that if you set aside Conservation Commission for a second, that the best architectural solution to the problem is by dealing with landscape and the grade. And I think of the three options you showed, you landed on, I think, probably what we would all consider to be our favorite with respect to maintaining the existing building character. I do like how that ties in the elevation of the berm with the playground area, and it makes that berm seem more natural. And I feel like at the end of the day would probably be the one that feels the least contrived, even though it's raising it the most, because you're keeping the lawn area and the bandstand as is. And rather than having a berm in front of a building that's elevated with ramps, you've pulled the grade into the building. So if the Conservation Commission would support something like that, that seems to be the most natural looking solution. That's it.
Thank you, Joseph. Connie, anything?
No, nothing further, just that I am in agreement with what's already been said with the fellow chair, the chair and the fellow board members. So nothing additional to add.
Thanks so much, Connie. Okay, Ian, thanks for letting us speak, but the mic, we can pass it over to you.
Thank you, Ray. Very instructive as well. And Seth, I see both Linda and Seth's hand up, but Seth, I believe yours was up first. So would you like to comment?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'll speak to the raising of grade issue to start off with, and to speak to Ray's comment it's not really what we like to do or we don't like to do, but we have a regulatory responsibility to not allow fill in the flood zone, specifically because our performance standards for the land subject to coastal storm flowage require us to not do anything to impede the passage of floodwaters. And by raising the grade with fill, you're doing exactly that. You're stopping the floodwaters and sending them backwards. Our regulatory responsibility is actually to let the floodwaters pass through this site so that they can get, farther landward. So I think that if you were going to go with project design 2A or 2B, there would be some significant concerns on that, and you would have to seek a waiver for that type of project. Well, actually, I think you're going to have to seek a waiver for any project, honestly, that's been presented at this point, because even in project design number 1, even though that the current building on site predates the enactment of the Wetlands Protection Act and the Nantucket local bylaw, so it could be considered a pre-existing use. Extending or modifying that use, which is what this would be, is a significant extension or modification, would then forfeit that pre-existing use and would require you to meet the performance standards, which I doubt this would meet the performance standards. So you're looking at a waiver probably for any of these projects. I don't think in my history on the Conservation Commission, there's ever been a project in this area that's allowed fill to be used on site. Specifically, I just looked it up. This is the flood zone AE at elevation 8. And so we're dealing with that. The other thing is some of the other proposed site improvements, I think, are going to be difficult to get by some of the wetland regulations. Even something like a raised berm, depending on what the structure of that berm is, or what the design or materials of that berm is, it could be considered a coastal engineering structure. And also, like the proposed extended and raised bulkhead, that's going to be considered a structure. I think right now, based on where the concession sits on site, it's in the flood zone and it's in the buffer zones to the coastal beach and coastal bank being the bulkhead, but it might technically be outside of the 50-foot buffer to both those zones. I'd have to check. So the structure might be able to exist in that site. We tend not to allow structure within 50 feet of those resource areas. So if you were to move the structure anywhere, you would probably be making it harder. And I think doing things like coastal dune restoration or extending the beach is only going to make the flood zone, or not the flood zones, the buffer zones extend farther onto the site and cause more performance standards to apply. So I know there's a lot of technical difficulties with this project. I understand it's a public concession, but our role as commissioners is not to decide whether we think this is something that benefits the island's public. It's to apply the same regulations to any project, private or public, to benefit the island's wetlands. So I foresee a lot of issues regulatory with this project. And I would just say one last thing, zooming out in terms of overall coastal resiliency. This is going to happen over and over and over again. The coastal resilience plan that was created is very comprehensive, and it's very forward looking, but it doesn't always match the existing regulations on site. So there is going to have to kind of be a give and take with what regulations are allowed to be waived and what aren't. But right now, a lot of the projects, not just this project, are going to have a problem with the regulations. And I would say when we think about these projects as a whole, not even from a Concom perspective, but just from an overall resiliency perspective. We also have to assess whether the structure is essential or not. So I mean, in my personal opinion, not a regulatory opinion, but my just personal opinion, a public food concession is not an essential structure. It's not a ferry dock, it's not a utility, it's not a hospital. It could probably just get moved off site or abandoned, and that would be fine with me. But I know that's probably not what the project representatives want to hear. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. Linda?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with a lot of what Ray said, coming from the historic side, which I was on for 20 years. And then I agree with a lot of what Seth said from the Concom perspective. I am not a fan of terracing grade. There's a very short run between that bandstand and this structure and this structure and the beach and this structure and the playground and the big field that every kid on Nantucket runs around in. I think that berming that thing, taking the bulkhead out, it looks like you're taking the bulkhead out, which has been there for umpteen years, and then terracing it down to the beach. I don't see how that's going to be effective. From a practical point of view, having worked on a structure right around the corner, the wave action and the push in from nor'easters and other issues is going to push in and take all that out. To me, I think practically speaking, I used to be married to a boatyard mechanic, and we were down there pulling boats out, snapping them up there. The water, that one storm came up right up to the concession building, and it would wash out all the terracing there. If we're talking about long term, you know, from a practical point of view, I've been down there too often in a storm. And that storm gate over there is useless. It just drives the water to a different location, which will be this. So I'm having more trouble with the changing of grades, the berming, the this, the that, the taking the bulkhead out, the singular access down the berming on this particular plan, and the other one by one boardwalk. I don't know if you're going to be able to reach 1 in 20, which is what, or 1 in 12, whichever one you're doing for AAB and ADA. I don't know. I'm more drawn to, if we're going to have to lift it, I got another question on that, have to lift it. I'm more drawn to the first one with some iteration or something in between, like I think Carrie mentioned, because the water can get underneath it and go back and forth. There's nothing blocking it. There's nothing to wash away. It just is. I've worked on a lot of structures in town, a couple in the velocity zone, a couple in the A zone, AE zone. And if it was a commercial structure, because I'm working with one now, it did not have to come up, and it was a contributing structure or a significant structure, whichever at the time. It did not have to come up all the way up. It could be tight wrapped. As you know, residential structures cannot take that exemption or that mitigation. Why does this have to come all the way up to that if it's a commercial structure? Through you, Mr. Chair, I don't know who to ask that to.
Well, I don't either, so.
Is that one of the architects, perhaps?
Perhaps, or we'll just leave it out there to address in the future and continue.
All right, because that is a big issue with, is that, the removal of the bulkhead. Why do we have to come up that far? We can tight wrap it. I'd rather have the water go underneath it and move around rather than all these grade changes and the taking the
Great.
terracing it down to the beach and all the rest of it. Yeah, I'm still having trouble with the whole thing, but I agree with a lot with what Seth said.
Thank you, Linda. So, Tim or Mark, do you have anything to add?
No, I don't. Thank you, though.
Is that you, Tim?
That's Tim, yeah.
Okay, Mark?
Yeah, excuse me. I'm troubled by one aspect, and this is sort of and it's damned if we do and damned if we don't, but this is sort of a piecemeal approach to this whole area. I see the big bulkhead being raised from Steamboat Wharf to go over in front of the yacht club. that's gonna be a major, major project. It's gonna require Conservation Commission input. And I know probably the town can't or won't speak for the entire downtown area, but I almost think we must. If you're starting to build barriers around structures or in front of structures, I think you can't do it piecemeal because water will go around it and then come into the area that's now where the grass is and flood that and then approach the building. I share Seth's concern about fill. This is not unique to Nantucket. I think we're going to probably see some state regulations change. So we'll lessen or remove some of the waiver requirements for projects like this. If that's what the experts and environmentalists think is a good idea, I'm not sure it is a good idea. Particularly on this site where you're right exposed to northeast. This site gets a pounding every winter with a good northeast gale. Linda is totally right. This is a very difficult site to try and protect. I think that berm that they made is going to be very nice till the first big northeast gale hits it, and it's going to get wiped out. So I'm skeptical of this solution. As much as I enjoy the area down there, my children have played there, my grandchildren have played there, so I love the area. Sea level rise is not going to be an easy solution. I mean, there are no easy solutions to this problem. Thank you, Ian.
No, not at all. Thank you, Mark. And so I have very little to add to my fellow commissioners because I think they've covered it fairly well. I think clearly we need a unified approach with the coastal resiliency plan to protect all of downtown. And so if this can be integrated into that plan, then I think that will make it easier to grant waivers rather than just having this project on its standing on its own at this point. I don't know if you've had computer modeling of how the berm might act in a nor'easter. It would seem to me, I'm not trying to make your job any harder, but it's definitely, all of us who've lived here for a while have witnessed what nor'easters do. So, but speaking as a private individual, I absolutely prefer the approach of raising it without making it look as though it's a fortress. So I think 2B is, if it was in concert with an approach for all of downtown, would be a laudable approach. Thank you.
Thank you. You've all raised a lot of good questions and that we've been grappling with. And this is why we wanted to have these two groups speak, sort of comment together. It really is, as you've noted, it really is a rock and a hard place in terms of, treating a historic structure, where if we going back to option 1 here, apologies to jumping around. So the existing structure and then raising in place. So raising in place is ideal from the point of view of, not changing grade, not adding any fill, not, sort of not having to negotiate or perhaps that's not negotiable, so the idea of raising grade here. And then we're left with a building that once you raise it it's really lost its historical character. And so this is the struggle we've been going back and forth with. I think you raised a good point about, it's a good point about, needing a unified approach to the downtown, protecting the downtown. because this site does need to be raised in some way. This is, if you're talking about the long term, you know, eventually. This is elevation, the elevation 5 contours here. It's closed here, and so then this is elevation 6, and that's really your high point is elevation 6, and then you're dropping back down to the beach. So you know, raising, it's really 18 inches of fill. Not to say that that's allowable. I'm just saying, like, we're in terms of the change, the actual change in grade is not that significant. But you know, trying to figure out what is permittable in order to get to that 7.23, you know, elevation to sort of can close off, you know, potentially close off that downtown flood pathway, you know, sort of what we were struggling with. I think I don't have any, you know, everybody has raised a lot of good points, and I think we needed to hear it all together. I'm not sure, I don't really want to go through point by point at this point. I think we need to regroup as a design, as you know, with the client group and sort of figure out next steps with having taken all of your feedback. Ray, thank you for being patient. Yeah, go ahead.
I did want to get back to one thing that I said. The fact that this building is considered historical, and the fact that we can, as a board, the HDC that is, write you a letter that allows you not to completely conform to the code. I'm going to guess that the reason that we're all gathered here to review this is that you want to get it completely out of the floodplain. That's the goal, right?
Yeah. So existing is 6.3. If we got an exemption and we left it in place, and in 2050 we had a storm that was at 10.2, it would destroy the building. Once you have over 2 feet of water within a structure, even if it's wet flood proofed, it becomes structurally compromised. So I think we were hoping to get it out of the, you know, get it up above the water.
Well,
okay.
And I don't want to get too granular with you, but so right at the moment, how high is the finished floor above a grade?
It is 1.3 feet above grade currently.
Okay, so let's just go down this path just for a moment, okay?
Sure. Yeah.
If we grant you the exception, okay, and you don't have to bring it up to code, it sounds to me like you could bring it up at least a foot. You can bring it up at least a foot, then you're still less than 30 inches for your drop off. So you don't need to have the big balustered rail that I think everyone, certainly from my board, is having a knee-jerk reaction to. And so you still maintain the cottagey feel. You have it a foot higher than it is now. I don't know. I think that this is a conversation that you might want to have with Holly, who's very well versed in you know, what your options are, other than simply bringing it up to meet all the current codes.
Holly, do you want to? I see you have your hand in.
Thank you. I just wanted to mention that I think it's important with all 3 of these options to include that all of them are actually being raised smaller than what is asked for. For instance, I believe, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but the first one for raising in place was at an increase of 5 foot elevation. And then 2A was a 4 foot raise in elevation. So all of them, and the 4 foot, if I'll remind the HTC, that based on our Resilient Nantucket is at the low and recommended elevation of raise of increase. So they actually were looking at this, and James, correct me if I'm wrong here, but we're looking at it based on our resilient Nantucket and based on the fact that they don't have to necessarily, that they can have that exemption because these are contributing structures towards the historic district.
Correct.
So that was all taken into consideration. Really, what it boils down to is these locations being in low-lying areas, being within areas that already have future plans with the coastal resiliency plan to be elevated. And how is it done? And I think I hear everybody loud and clear about this piecemeal effect. I think staff, and I don't want to speak for my fellow staff members for the town, but I think we all agree that, we don't want this to be piecemeal, but how is it done? And that, town should be leading by example. So I agree with Matt and appreciate everybody's comments today on this. Thank you.
Vince, did you have any thoughts or questions before we, oh, and sorry, Linda, I see you have your hand up. Linda, why don't you please go ahead?
I still want an answer to that question about exempting commercial structures, tight wrapping them so they don't have to come up that far, et cetera, et cetera. I still want an answer to that because I've done it at least 3 or 4 times downtown. And I'm working on a building now where we may or may not have to do that because it's a contributing structure, et cetera, et cetera. So I want an answer to that. Because if we don't have to come up, whether we exempt it because it's a contributing structure or whatever, there is an exemption in the state law where commercial structures don't have to come up 7 or 8 feet out of the ground. Can you address that?
I am not, I don't have the answer to that.
Yeah, Linda, I need to look into that question. So.
Yeah, because we have a building downtown and we have the barbecue down there on Straight Wharf. The first 4 feet is concrete, but it doesn't look like it's raised. There is one on South Water Street where, because it's a commercial structure, they tight wrapped it. There's one going down, it's now in the velocity zone. It wasn't at the time, down Washington Street where they tight wrapped it. They didn't have to come all the way up. So I know there's something for a commercial structure where it doesn't have to come all the way up out of the flood zone. So it might help with this whole project.
Thank you, Linda.
sorry.
So can we ask a member of staff or Holly, could you address this and reach out to us through staff so that Linda gets a reply to that? Thank you very much.
Work on that. Yes. Just
Sorry,
on a
Matt.
follow-up on that, just that I believe with our resilient Nantucket, it doesn't matter if it's commercial or residential. It's a matter of whether it's a contributing or not, and it doesn't have to meet the substantial compliance under the building code. End of story. But I'll look into this commercial aspect. Thanks.
Thank you, Holly. And Matt, I apologize for interrupting you.
Oh, that's okay. Thank you. Vince, do you have any comments or questions before we move on to jetties?
No, at the moment, I think we're getting the feedback we need and that is relevant for the project. But it is probably time to move on to jetties at this point. We're going to have similar discussions there, I should imagine. So once they're taken as a whole, we can get a better sense of how to address the project and how I'm trying to reinvigorate these designs. Thank you, guys.
Yep, understood. Thank you, Vince. All right, so we'll move on to jetties. Jump forward here.
Matthew?
Yes.
I'm going to need to jump off. And I think that when I jump off, I believe Stephen can fill the chair for the HCC. I think he's still on.
Yep.
Okay.
Understood.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I think it was a productive meeting, or at least the portion that I'm seeing. Thanks so much, everyone.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah.
So for jetties, this is really much more of an architectural solution. And we'll walk through the options there. Again, we landed on the 2050 1% storm, which is elevation 10.3, not to be confused with the other site, which was 10.2. And again, this is a still water elevation. And again, this was really chosen for feasibility and our ability to raise the building without really seriously impacting its character. It is currently at the finished floor is at 7.2, so which is 3.1 feet below the 2050 target design flood elevation. Ground elevation is 3.3. We did look at moving the building back, potentially siting it within this parking lot back here. But that was both poorly received in the public survey, and also really does, the building's relationship to the beach obviously changes drastically when you do that. So even though it's elevation 5 back here, but it's vastly different feel. So we also did look at raising it to the 2070 storm, but that is 4.5 feet, which is beyond the historic Nantucket guidelines, and also really does a number on the appearance of the building. Looking at this is just showing the conceptual long-term strategies. Again, these are conceptual, so we don't need to dwell on them. Whether there's a raised road, that protects this part of the island. Either way, the building is seaward of that raised road in its current conceptual idea anyways. So yeah, I will. And essentially I will jump ahead just for the Concom members, just to show that really in this project, we're leaving the site really as is. We can't raise the road without significant engineering challenges that involve pumping the stormwater. If we raise the road, we're also affecting the dunes on either side. So that the road question needs much more further study. And the beach in front of the building is really well used. We did look at closing it off, at least raising the building and then separately closing this off with a dune, but that really does impact the sort of social use of the beach, and it just along with potential impacts to sort of bird habitat, that was also it didn't fly. So I will turn it back to James to discuss the building approach to getting up to 10.3.
Yes, so back to talking about raising a building and lowering a building. The situation with the Jetties concession or beach concession facility is it's a larger, as we know, it's a larger facility, 2 separate buildings. And back to Matt's decision about a previous idea was to move it back from its existing site location. We're basically taking away the historical context. So to look at this building and solving the scenario of how to raise in place and not have an impact to the building facility is that we started looking at the original building and its terraces. And right now the building's layout with the main building and then one terrace or one ramp/terrace below. So taking upon that design and looking at the impact of basically going from 3.3 to 10.3, which is a 7-foot difference, and looking at the historical context of the building as a Peabody and Stern original structure, 1904, we look at the terraces themselves and the usage. So Matt, go ahead with the next slide. So in this case, we look at I would call it a wedding cake design. So it's a step design. So basically you take the building itself, you take the terraces step down away from the building, going towards the, shoreline. At the same time, you take the accessible component and integrate it into the terraces themselves. So instead of one continuous ramp, you break up the ramp, you break up the steps and the stairs going from terrace to terrace to terrace, so that it becomes more of a functioning space to which it's being used right now. Circulation wise, you're going back to the accessible point, when the accessible point closer to what's the parking area as exists right now. And, visually, by doing this, step process, you take it away from showing, as we talked about, Ray had mentioned about the balusters, and use the original design of what was as Chippendale design of between the posts, so as you can see right through it. It's a breakaway system, as Linda had pointed out, in this building. So the building itself, the main building, would be exactly 7 feet, but it had the breakaway proportion so that water would just flow right through it. I'm trying to think what else is another point of it. We have not changed the main building character. We just basically start changing the terrace character. So the terraces themselves were built at a later date. We're just adding to them. So it's more of a functional space. So I'm trying to think what else. And then the flow of the building. We have not really changed the flow of the building. It still continues from the back side of the building to the front side of the building. And, everything works in its favor. So. So it's up to you, Matt.
Yeah. So the in terms of the relationship to the site, there's the, there's a boardwalk sort of that allows a accessible surface, at grade coming off of the parking. And then to James's point about sort of circulation, you'd sort of enter the first terrace here, you'd either continue on or come all the way up to the sort of current terrace level right before the building, and either and then be able to circulate through. There's and then again, site-wise, there's not much to say. So I think at this point, we'll open it up to questions.
Yep.
I'll go back to the Linda.
I'm really concerned about this. That area that you're extending out there, how many feet is that from the current lower deck that it's going out?
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
About,
boy. Like 30 feet
30 feet.
farther out? That area is used as beach. They sit on the beach there. They have activities on the beach there. They have, picnic tables down on that beach so they can be removed if there's a big activity like a volleyball tournament that goes down there, which I've run for 35 years. And I'm looking at this going, wait a minute, that's taking a beach, and the beach is getting narrower and narrower every year because the dunes are actually revegetating themselves. So the east to west of that beach is actually getting narrower. It was, you can see one of the old volleyball posts about 25 feet to the right, where the beach used to be that wide. So every year, and they rope it off because of the plovers, and that doesn't help. But every year the beach is getting narrower and narrower and narrower. And your terrace on that left or the west side is going right up against a dune that's like closing in the way we want the dunes to revegetate, but it's eventually going to take over the whole Jetties Beach. I'm concerned about this particular iteration where you're extending out another 30 feet of structure. Just from a practical point of view, a beach usage point of view, and over the sand, another 30 feet. So I'm having a lot of difficulty with this particular iteration. I don't know if there's another way around it. Again, as you know, if you lift it a little bit, the water can go on underneath it. It does get up, I have seen it come all the way up and go into the parking lot from the northeast. And down the street. The no-name storm, the front porch came off and we were down there and it floated all the way down Bathing Beach Road to the corner of Halbert Avenue. So I know what can happen here in a bad storm. We get a 100-year storm every year now. And I'm not enthusiastic about extending the structure out that far. I'm sorry. I know we need to fix the building. I know we need to protect the building. It is a historic structure. Unfortunately, a lot of the more historic aspects of the building have been taken off over time since the turn of the century, but I'm having trouble with this particular iteration.
Thank you, Linda. And since it looks as though Concom is going first on this one, Seth, Diane, if you don't mind, would you let Seth speak?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I share
Yes.
some of Linda's concerns. So in this case, well, first I'd like to start by saying I agree with the decision not to move the structure because there's not really any place to move it to. The historic character aside, if you look at the rest of that site of the town of land, you're either moving it from one flood zone to another flood zone, or the only place that you can move it outside of the flood zone on this site is a mapped coastal dune. So you can't really get it outside of a resource area here. So if you can't get it outside of the resource area, might as well leave it where it is. But in terms of where it is, it's both within the flood zone, again, AE at elevation 8, and this one's actually completely within the coastal beach, coastal dune interface. So now you're talking not about a buffer zone project, but now you're talking about a structure that actually exists in a resource area. And in our performance standards for coastal beach, there is a requirement that no new structure should be allowed within coastal beach. These extensive terraces would definitely be considered a structure. I get the need to create ADA access. And again, there's going to have to be a waiver project here. But I think trying to see something as massive as what you're picturing here, not only 30 feet long, but however wide that is, I don't know, 50 feet wide. However wide that is, it's a huge amount of surface area and of structural area. So from a private citizen's perspective, I think I understand it. I think it makes sense theoretically, but I see a huge problem from a regulatory perspective here, that something like this is going to be very difficult to get put through, and would need to be wavered. One thing I was considering is, if you look at where the buildings are currently, and they face towards the Nantucket Sound, and facing towards the parking lot is the backs of the buildings. The backs of that buildings, to be honest, is still flood zone and it's still coastal beach, but there's perhaps less of an impact if all this terracing goes in the back rather than in the front, because at least it's farther away from stormwater passage. I will say though, and Vince and Jeff can back me up on this, the building that's all the way down by the tennis court there used to be the Natural Resources Department office, and they spent every day there. And in big storms, water goes all the way past there and floods that building out. So this is a very constrained site again. And I think that it's going to either have to be wavered through the Concom, or I don't know if it's technically called a waiver or a variance through the HDC or whatever it is, but it's gonna be a difficult project to get through. And I think less is more with all these projects. Try to do the absolute least amount of disturbance possible, and use all the tools that you have available to you. And it might not be the ideal project that you're hoping for. But again, I just think that if we're doing these things incrementally, we should use incremental approaches. And then when we go do a substantial project for all of downtown, then we can do the bigger picture projects then. But I wouldn't be able to support this as a single site project as it's presented today. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. Diane, would you
Well, I
like
have a,
to follow up?
yes. I was wondering why this building is considered to be increasing by the amount of area that it is. Why can it not stay the size as it is now? Why are we adding 30 feet out and however many feet it is wide, which I can't pick up? Why can't it, well, why cannot we consider it as it exists? Which makes it more adaptable to what we have there. You've got a huge dune just behind it that is got a considerable size, and actually the whole sort of area in that in behind that building is that extent. Why can't the area in front of the existing building be kept as sand? And if they have something special, to add something for that night, but not go to the extent of what is proposed to be added to it now. That's my question right at the moment. Thank you. Ian, I guess I'm asking you.
Oh, well, I think really, again, to Mr. Soul, you know, the question is, this is preliminary where they're listening to what we have to say and are taking our suggestions into account. And I think we're all wrestling with these issues. So I don't know whether Mr. Soul or Mr. Barron wants to address that in any way, or if we just want to take this under advisement. I don't know whether staff has anything further to say.
I guess I would just say to the question that it was in order to reach the target elevation, the additional terraces were added to sort of break down that height difference to sort of, you know, essentially terrace the building back down to grade. And that's really driven by the amount that we're trying to raise the building. James, is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's fair to say. And that so we basically, instead of having you know, going back to the children's where we lifted the building up and visually it was, you know, just like I said, a wall of China. Now we're stepping the building down. So it's just gradually goes, you know, or raising the building, but stepping the terraces up to it. So it doesn't, you know, visually doesn't impact. But I understand the concern of now you're building these terraces out and you're taking away the beach and the concession and the beach operation itself. So you know, does it go back to the question drawing board? Yeah, it does, in a way that, you know, we try to solve two things. We try to solve accessibility and beach, you know, raising the structure for the beach. Now we have to look at, okay, if we move the ramp and relocate, you know, these terraces or take the terraces out, do we still have a hold of the circulation, but still go with the question is raised, do we still raise the building?
Do you mind if I add something to that? Just as a fellow HDC member to Diane's comment too. And as an architect, I mean, I can appreciate your solution here of the terraces because it is in keeping with the terraces that are obviously they're more extensive, but I can see where you got to that wedding cake design as you described it. And I do think it's clever that the ramp works off to the side. And, you know, if I think about this as a business owner that's running the concession stand where their dining has expanded out onto the beach area and they've got tables out there now and more seating, that, you know, you would actually consolidate a lot of this dining onto these terraces, and you might actually have, I don't know if you'd have more beach, but their current, if you did an aerial shot in August of this restaurant, you've got the terraces and then they've got tables and then seating that stretches out to a marked off area. I don't think you're beyond that area, but so from an architectural perspective, setting aside Concom for a second, I think it makes some sense. It's extensive, but it makes sense. And then one of your first comments about moving this back to the parking lot, I thought, oh, that's interesting. Maybe not that back that far. And so when I look at this, I'm wondering whether or not there's a solution that actually you do have to lift the building up, right, in order to do all this work. So if it were to lift up and go counterclockwise and kind of be more focused on that view, are you able to get more elevation naturally, which maybe diminishes one of these terraces out of there? Now that's setting aside the stuff that Seth said, and it sounds like there's a berm or there's jurisdiction even along the back of this thing. So all of that might be irrelevant. But if I look at it from an architectural perspective, I can see where this thing just going clockwise and counterclockwise and back may improve its connection to the beach, and maybe you actually gain more beach, and maybe you lose a terrace, but I don't think it's going to mitigate any of your Conservation Commission issues.
Thank you. Could you identify yourself for the record, please?
Oh yeah, sorry, Joe Paul. I'm an associate member of the HDC. Oh yeah,
Thank you,
it says
Joe.
I'll change my title on my
There we
Zoom.
go. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So,
Ian?
yes,
Hi, Stephen Welch. Good evening. I just a couple quick comments. I just want to reiterate and emphasize, I think Seth made, really pragmatic approach, incremental. This is in a variety of ways. This is a sensitive structure, a sensitive site, both architecturally, historically, ecologically, and also with respect to its kind of iconic value. On the steps themselves, I think we're one beach too close to Steps Beach. I'd suggest something along the simplification, one tier, and minimizing as much as possible. I'll get into architectural when it comes to HDC, but I would broadcast that. But again, I can't emphasize enough. I think Seth's comments were really on the mark. And I think that we can kind of reach back to Children's Beach and apply the same approach. So that's it for me. I see Diane, your hand is still up. Did you have an additional comment, or was that just a holdover?
No, I forgot.
Okay, and then Linda?
I appreciate the comments that are being made. It's a very difficult structure. I am well familiar with what it looked like back in the day. I would not, from a point of view, I would not be in favor of twisting the building at all. This is its original orientation. I'm just still having a great deal of difficulty, I'll reiterate, to adding more hard structure on the sand.
Right.
I'm just not there at all. So I just want to let you know that up front.
thank you, Linda. So, if there's nothing further to be said, Stephen, would you like to call the end of the meeting and have a roll call with the HDC, and I will do the same for the Concom?
Sure.
Okay, and
Thanks for the invitation, Ian. And HCC members, we're gonna ask for John McLaughlin.
So move.
All right, John, on your motion.
Aye.
Thanks, Diane. Joe?
Aye.
Connie?
Aye.
And I'm an aye. We'd just like to thank you all. This is just a great experience for us to get a chance to see how you all work and two important structures. So thanks again and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. And I definitely would reiterate what Stephen has said, and it's been very interesting indeed. And so on that note, may I call Mark Beal? Mark? Do you make a
Yeah.
motion?
I'll make the motion.
Okay.
Somebody, I'll make the
Linda's
motion.
made the motion. Okay,
Somebody.
Mark seconding. So Mark,
Aye.
great. And Tim, Brain,
Yeah,
Seth
aye.
Engelborg,
Aye.
Linda Williams,
Aye.
Ian Golding, aye. Thank you very much, everybody. Good night.
Night.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hey, Charlie, don't forget to end the recording.
Yep.